If I do any changes to a particular requirement, then it should not get affected by any other requirement. By analyzing the operations or a task whichever is required for the new system or for the upcoming system, that will going to be analyzed and documented by the team of engineers as well as by the developers. When the requirements are related to the working or operation of any of a software or a product, then we are going to call that as a functional requirement. Hello everybody, a warm welcome to one and all. Welcome back to the session 3 of Unit 2, and we are in the B.C.A 6th semester subject called Software Engineering. So as we all know that Unit 2 is all about software requirements. I am Rohini TS, Department of Computer Science, Vidhyaashram, First Grade College, the Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. So before getting into today's concept, let me have a recap of my previous session. As we all know that in the previous session, we have discussed regarding requirement engineering. So what do you mean by requirement engineering? That is what I have discussed, the definition of this requirement engineering. We are gathering the requirements from the different stakeholders in order to analyze it and it to document for the future usage. And also we got to know the process of requirement engineering. So what are the stages it will going to include? That is what I have discussed. Along with that, requirement elicitation process. So in the previous class only we got to know that what is requirement elicitation process, but in our today's session we'll see what requirement elicitation techniques consist of. So if you know what is requirement elicitation process, it will going to have certain stages or a phases. Then what are the methodology or a techniques that we have in order to collect that requirement? It's all about requirement elicitation techniques. And also we'll see about the software requirement characteristics. So here software requirement specification is important, and along with that, what are the requirements of a software? That characteristics, what the characteristics it must include, that is also I will be discussing in my today's session, along with the software requirement categories, how it will going to be categorized or classified. That is what I will be discussing in my today's session. So here you can see that what is requirement elicitation technique is all about. First, it is necessary to understand what is requirement elicitation. Mainly, it's a process to find out the requirements for an intended software system. So here I have to find out what is the requirement of any of a software or a project or a product. Then how can I get to know its requirements? Just by communicating with a client or end users or a system user, even other the person, one who belongs to that software system development. Those are all the stakeholders of a particular software system. By communicating with everybody, we are going to collect all the requirements which is required for the development of a software. And also we have several ways or several techniques that we have in order to have this requirement elicitation. So here you can see that here we have certain requirement elicitation techniques that includes interviews, surveys, questionnaires, task analysis, and also we have a domain analysis, then brainstorming, then we have a prototyping as well as observation. So these are the different methodologies that we have in order to gather the requirement or in order to perform a requirement elicitation process. So under that, first we have a interviews. We'll see about the interview right now. So now we'll see the first elicitation technique, that is regarding interviews. So as we all know that if I say interview, so many things which will comes to your mind, right? So it can be oral interview or it can be of a written interview, and it can be open interview or a closed interview. So by this method, there is a chances of gathering the requirements from the different stakeholders or even from the customers or an end user, which will be helpful in order to develop a given system. So here in the interviews, organization will going to conduct several types of interviews. So it's not only one method of interview they are going to conduct. So here we have several types. In that first one we have regarding structured or closed interview. If it is a structured, at the time predefined questionnaires will be there, and it will going to take place within the organization and within known people. So they won't discuss it with others, and it will be more biased than the open interview. So in the closed interviews, where every single information to gather is decided in advance. So already whatever the information that we are going to gather with the help of this closed interview, all the information or all the data whatever they are collecting are already decided in advance, and also they follow certain pattern and matter of discussion firmly. So they already have a set of standards, they already have set of questionnaires. Based on that, they are going to have a discussion with a known people. At the time, by that methodology also, they can gather the requirements. So next what we have here, it is non-structured. If it is non-structured, it is related to open interview. Here, the questionnaires will not going to be disclosed or discussed in advance. It's not structured and they haven't follow any of the rules and regulation. It will be a completely open type system to gather the information, so that it is not decided in advance. It will be more flexible and less biased. So there is no hide and seek in the open interview. It will be of less bias, but in the structured or a closed interview, that will be of more bias than this open interview. And it can be of oral interview or written interview. If it is oral interview, it will be by talk. They will just communicate with the people, and they will gather the requirements which is required for the development of a project or a process. And also, when it comes to the written interview, they are going to give set of questions. Based on that, the user will going to give their feedback or a review. So these are the types of interview. Along with that, we have a one-to-one interview. As the name indicates, one-to-one. It will be a communication between the discussion team as well as with a customer or a person, one who came for the interview, so that which are held between two persons across the table. It will be arranged in a table, and there will be a communication. It will be on one-to-one. So that is one-to-one interview. So in this, they can gather more information, and time will be given for the one-to-one interaction will be very high. So you can get to know the perspective of individual with the help of this one-to-one interview. And in contrast to this, we have a group interview. So as the name indicates, group interview in the sense what? There will be more than 3 people over there, and they are going to have a discussion. So based on each individual perspective, they will gather the information, they combine all together, and they can come to the conclusion. So that which are held between the groups of participants, they help to uncover any missing requirements as numerous people are involved. As we all know that the perspective will be different from person to person, and they are going to discuss all the requirements whichever they have gathered with the help of this group interviews. They will communicate and they will interact with each other. At last, they will come to the conclusion by saying this requirement is well for the organization to develop a particular software or a system which is given by the customer. So that this is regarding the first type of elicitation technique in order to gather the requirements. We'll see the next one, that is with respect to surveys. As the surveys, all we know that they are going to do certain research things in the survey. They are going to communicate with the people, they visit certain fields, then they will gather some information. By that methodology, there is also chances of having certain requirements which is necessary for the development of a project. So that organization may conduct surveys among various stakeholders by querying about their expectation and requirements from the upcoming system. So mainly you have to understand one thing. Already they have existing system. So now they are seeking for the new system which will going to have new features and new updated version of a existing system. So that whatever the things that they have faced in the existing system and what they are expecting in the new system, with the help of this transformation, they are gathering some information. In order to gather that information, these are all the techniques whatever we have. That is what we are going to call that as a requirement elicitation technique. Under that already we know about an interview. So now I have certain existing system. This is what my expectation in the coming system or upcoming system. These are the new features that I wanted to incorporate. So in order to get to know their new requirement, their new upgradation to the existing system, all these techniques we are having. So in the surveys also, the organization or an enterprise will going to have a set of queries or a questionnaires that will be asked for the various stakeholders. Like it can be asked for the analyst, designer, what kind of design you wanted to take this time. So what are the possible way of having a coding, what kind of software you are using. So all those questionnaires will be incorporated, or it will be given to all the kinds of stakeholders. By taking their requirement, by taking their reviews or a feedback, they are going to fulfill the upcoming system by incorporating all those requirements. So here they will querying about all their expectation and their requirements from the upcoming system. This is also one of the methodology to gather the requirements. So what we have next, that is regarding questionnaires. What is this questionnaires is all about? In the word we have a questionnaires. That means we are going to ask certain question. There will be a predefined set of questions will be there, and certain number of options also there. Like it will be like MCQs. They are going to have one question and there will be 4 options. So whichever is best suited for a given question, they will mark that. So after collecting the many answers for a particular questionnaires, at last they will come to the conclusion by saying that for this number of question, for this question, the number of answers are same. So the weightage will be high. So we'll take this option and we'll go further. That is what they are going to do in the questionnaires. But what do you think about a problem which may arise in a questionnaires? For example, I have one question and I am going to give you 4 options, but you are expecting something else beyond that 4 options. At that time, that questionnaire will not going to require, or that questionnaire will not going to survive the requirements of a customer. That is also one of the disadvantages that we have in a questionnaires. So if my answer, whatever the predefined set of questionnaires along with its answer that I am giving, based on that or within that circumstance only we have to answer. But if my expectation is beyond my option, then that can't be survived in the questionnaires pattern. So that a document with a predefined set of objective questions and respective option is handed over to all the stakeholders to answer, which are collected and compiled. As I told earlier, so they are going to have a set of predefined question along with certain option. It will be given to all the kinds of stakeholder. Whatever they may feel right for the particular question, they will mark that. After collecting all the answers from all the stakeholders, they are just going to compile it, like whether which question got same answer most of the time. So that is what they will do, the compilation as well as the collection of all those requirements. And as I told earlier, there will be a disadvantage. So if the option for some issue is not mentioned in the questionnaires, so at that time there will be chances of missing the requirements. This is regarding what? Questionnaires. What is the next methodology we have in order to do the requirement elicitation? That is regarding task analysis. So as we all know that task is an operation that will going to perform in order to satisfy a particular requirement. So in the task analysis, what they will do, they are going to have certain operation. The operation will going to be analyzed by a team of engineer as well as the developer. So by analyzing all those operation or all the task whatever is required in order to solve a given problem, by that only they are going to collect the requirements. So that in the team of engineers and developers, they may analyze an operation for each which the new system is required. So by analyzing the operations or a task whichever is required for the new system or for the upcoming system, that will going to be analyzed and documented by the team of engineers as well as by the developers. So in this task analysis, they will ask the user, do you have any predefined software or would you like to work with any software? So if the user gives the software by themselves, at the time based on that software, this set of or team of engineers and developers will going to work on that particular software to perform certain operation. Even that ideology is also there in the task analysis. Main intention is what? We have to accomplish a task. We have to finalize the task with the help of certain requirements as well as by the particular software. So as I told earlier, if the client already has some of the software to perform certain operation, then it will be studied and they can come to the conclusion by gathering all the requirements of a proposed system will be collected. This is one of the technique that we can use in order to have a requirement elicitation technique. Next, what we have, that is domain analysis. If I say domain, the main concern is regarding what? Reuse of a modules. So, how can I reuse the existing system? How can I improve the quality of the existing system? If you are reusing it, then there will be a chances of minimizing the task time or minimizing the cost, and their effort, time, everything will going to be saved. So that when we have a good quality of a reuse of existing system, then no need to do it again from the scratch. So that the domain analysis will going to help in order to whatever we had in an existing system, can I use any of the model or can we reuse any of the model? By that also there will be a chances of gathering the information. If I know how it has been done earlier, then it will be easy for us to replicate it. No need to do it again from the scratch. So by just looking over all the existing system and whatever the modules which can be reused, everything will be analyzed and it will going to be collected as a requirement, so that every software fall into some domain category. If you take the example of ATC, air traffic control system, and also we have a banking system. Are we going to develop a certain software on a daily basis? No, right? Once we are going to invest certain efforts, time, as well as the money and certain software, everything will going to be developed in a one shot. At the time, the same software or a same domain will going to be used for a certain days or certain years. So what it means, the reusability will be very high, and if you wish to incorporate any of the new feature, then also it will be easy for the existing system. So domain needs to be analyzed. For example, any of the task or any of the requirements that we are gathering, first we have to decide it belongs to which domain, whether I wanted to take it for the banking sector or whether it is related to educational purpose or it is related to research. So we have to categorize the domain, then we have to work on that. So analysis of that domain is also going to be a very important role, and we can't expect fish to climb a tree, right? So that is what we have to understand, what must be the domain, to where it belongs to, then how can I get the benefit out of that? By analyzing all those domains, it will be easy to gather the requirement, so that the expert people, those who are in the domain system, will going to analyze this belongs to, or this object belongs to which category or a class. Then if we are differentiating or if we are segregating it properly, then it would be a very good task with the help of these expert people, whoever we have, in order to analyze all those requirements which is required for the development of a project. Next, what we have, that is brainstorming. What it means? Brainstorming in the sense, an informal debate is held among various stakeholders. Here, they are going to conduct a debate kind of technique in order to gather the requirement from the various stakeholders. For example, one stakeholder mindset will going to be different from other stakeholders. And also with the help of this brainstorming technique, there will be chances of gathering more techniques or more knowledge or information or a requirement of a particular system. Because when we have a collection of people or when we have a group of people, at the time ideas which will going to be generated will be more. Due to the human tendency, if they are saying 10,000, other one would like to say 11,000. What it mean moreover, that means they have to make them as a top one. So in this brainstorming also, by conducting a debate, by conducting an informal debate, that means it should not be a systematic, they are free to talk, they are free to interact, to communicate. All those will be of free or it will be of open. At that time, the idea generation will be very high. So when they are debating or when they are giving all those ideas, at that time inputs will going to be recorded for the future or a further requirement analysis. So when they are communicating or when they are debating to each other, at the time it will going to be recorded and it will be analyzed, and can we use this requirement for the further development of a software or a system. Everything will going to be rectified and it will be used for a future development of a system. That is regarding what? Brainstorming. It's all related to what? Cognitive technique. That means based on the IQ of different stakeholders, their perspective and their expectation toward the system, everything will going to be collected in the brainstorming. And next, what we have? Prototyping. if I am approaching or if I am giving certain system to be developed, at the time being a customer or being an end user, I can't expect to know every in and out of a complete system, right? So what it means, for certain times I just know what I want, but I don't know how it needs to be implemented. But when we have this prototyping methodology, at the time, if I say my requirements to the developer, at that time developer will going to analyze that requirements. They will analyze your perspective of getting a solution you are seeking for a particular problem. By analyzing your requirement, they are just going to build a dummy model. Prototype in the sense it's not the actual one. They are just going to build a dummy model, and they will incorporate the requirements whatever you have given, and they will give it you for the usage. So when you start using it, at the time you may feel that I want this requirement, that requirement, I wanted to remove another requirements. So after doing all these try and error methodology, and after communicating with the developer or an analyst, then customer will come to the conclusion, this is what my requirement, this is what I was looking for. Then when the developer get to know this is what the requirements of a customer, then it will be easy for them to develop a new system. So in that methodology also we can use this prototyping when the user is not so familiar with the system and when they don't know what they are looking for, but they just know I want this requirement, I want my software to be like this, but I exactly don't know what I am looking for or what are the methodologies we have in order to come to that conclusion. So moreover, what you just wanted to build a house, but you don't know where you wanted to purchase the site and what kind of interior decoration you wanted to have, that and all you don't know, but your main intention is what? I wanted to build a very good house. That is what at the time this prototyping methodology will going to be very helpful. So that prototyping is building user interface without adding detailed functionality for user to interpret the features of intended software product. So that user will not know very much or very well with respect to any of a functionality or a features of a system. They will just give the core functionality to the developer or an analyst. By analyzing all those things, it will be helpful in order to have a better idea of requirement. So if there is no software installed at client's end for the developer's reference and the client is not aware of its own requirements, when the user doesn't know their own requirement, at the time the developers creates a prototype based on initially mentioned requirements. So I have certain requirements, I don't know what I am looking for. At last I want a very good software or a product. At the time, based on the initial requirements whichever is given by the customer, based on that this developer will going to develop a dummy model or a virtual model. Then it will be given to the customer for the usage. When they are using, they will get to know what is their need and what is their requirement they are looking for. So that the prototype is shown to the client and the feedback is noted. So when they start using towards to that, they will get to know what is their requirements and all. Their feedback will be takes place and they will be collected all those feedback, and that feedback will be converted into requirement. That requirement will going to be incorporated to the developing system, so that the client feedback serves as an input for the requirement gathering. So here the feedback whatever is given by the customer or to by the stakeholder will be considered as the input for this kind of system or a methodology. So next we have a observation. So what it means, when we are observing something, are we going to ask a question? No, right? So by just observing, we will conclude or we will come to the final decision by just looking or by just observing a certain scenario or certain situation. In the same way, here also observation in the terms developer or analyst will going to visit the place of a client or a stakeholders where they are working. And for example, if I wanted to incorporate certain feature or a new system in the building called A. So at the time, the developer or analyst will going to visit this building without asking any question or without communicating anybody. They are just going to observe how the functionality and features of this building A is working. So what kind of work they are doing inside that A building. So all those will going to be analyzed. They will come up with a pen and paper so that they are just going to mark based on their observation. So sometimes their observation might be wrong, and their observation may be right also. So that's what their own perspective. By observing, what I can conclude will going to be different from another analyst. So that is also the one of the methodology that we can use for the requirement gathering. So that here team of experts will going to visit the client's organization or a workplace. As I told you, just take this example. They will visit that and they will observe the actual working of a existing installed system. So then they will get to know these are the errors they are getting and these are the functionalities we would like to incorporate. By looking all those things, they will come to the conclusion as the result of a observation. So that they observe the workflow at client's end and how execution problems are dealt. So how they are dealing a particular problem of a given error or whatever the problems they are facing in the existing system, everything will going to be analyzed and will be observed, so that the team itself draws some conclusions. They will come to the conclusion, or they are going to conclude by observing the working of the particular workstation or by the place wherever the client is working with the existing system. So which will be helpful to form a requirement which is expected from the customer. I don't know how to say the requirements. At the time, I will call the experts to visit my workplace and I will say them, this is what my workstation or a workplace. You just observe it and however you feel or whatever the changes that you wanted to incorporate, that you do. So this is what how this observation methodology will going to takes place. I hope you all understood. It's all about regarding software elicitation techniques. Next, what we have, that is software requirement characteristics. First, already we know what is requirement, what is software requirements, right? I wanted to develop a system. For that, I wanted to gather certain requirements from the different kinds of stakeholders by naming clients, end users or developers, designers, analyzers. So we have certain number of stakeholders in order to develop any of a system. So here, first we have to understand, for example, if I am collecting any of a requirement. So in the previous slides all, we have learned what are the types of techniques we have in order to collect a requirement, right? So after collecting all that requirement, then how that requirement must be. What must be the characteristics of that requirements? So we'll see here, gathering the software requirements is the foundation of entire software development project. If you don't know what the requirement of a developing software is all about, then we can't develop any of a software or a project. Then how must be all this requirement? It needs to be very clear and it has to be correct and very well defined as well as documented. So here I have listed out certain software requirement specification characteristics that includes clear. For example, if I am giving any of the requirements, I can't be like blah blah blah, right? It has to be very clear. It should not be any ambiguous, confusion should not be there. If I say A, it has to be A. It can't be inverted V. So that is what. It needs to be very clear. Whatever the requirement that we have gathered, everything needs to be very well defined. It has to be clear and there should not be any ambiguity or a confusions, and it needs to be correct. So whatever the requirements that we are gathering or collecting needs to be correct in the terms of for the documentation. For example, if I say 5 requirements, but in the documentation if I have only 4 requirements, that should not be the case. So if my requirements are 5, then even in the documentation it has to be 5 only. That is what it needs to be correct and consistent. So it can't be fluctuate more time. For example, today I will have 100 requirements. By the evening of today only, I will come up with another 100 features by erasing all the existing requirements. That should not be the case. It has to be consistent for a certain time at least. That is consistent. And we have a coherent. So coherent in the sense what? It's all related to quality, being quality in the terms of logical and consistency must be there, and there must be a unity as a whole. That is what coherent. For example, if we incorporating any of the requirements with another requirement, it should not make any trouble to another requirement. And also we have a comprehensible. So it's also related to its quality. For example, the requirement needs to be isolated. For example, if I am giving one requirement, that should not affect the content of another requirement. Even a given requirement should not be affected by another requirement. If I do any changes to a particular requirement, then it should not get affected by any other requirement. So that it needs to be comprehensive, modifiable. So as we all know that consistency also should be there, as well as we have a modifiability. So for example, if I don't want my requirement to be static, or if I wanted to upgrade any of a system or a feature, at that time there must be a modifiability. It has to be flexible enough in order to incorporate certain new features or a requirement as per the demand of a market. And also we have a verifiable. So when we wanted to validate it, so there must be a verifiability also. So based on the requirement whatever we have, so against that requirements, it needs to be validated, and also it needs to be prioritized. So based on certain circumstance, based on the urgency, or based on its importance, it needs to be prioritized. And when we are prioritizing all the requirements, that should not affect other requirements also. Based on certain requirement, this prioritization of a requirement will going to takes place. And as we all know that it needs to be unambiguous. So it should not be like a mixture, right? It has to be very clear. It needs to be confident, consistent, and coherent. All those features should be there. Then only we can say that it's unambiguous. That means it's confusion free. So that has to be there when we are collecting any of a software requirements. And it needs to be traceable. So it must be able to have or to maintain a history of a requirements. I have to go back, or we have to come forward in order to understand the requirements. So if I wanted to go back or backward, requirement of a software needs to be traced, and if I wanted to check the future of that requirement, that is also must be there. So that traceability should be there, and credible source. So all these are the characteristics of a software requirements. So based on this, we are going to categorize this software requirement into two parts, that is functional requirements and non-functional requirements, and also we have a domain based requirements. So based on the software requirement should be categorized in the following categories, that includes functional requirement and non-functional requirements. So when the requirements are related to the working or operation of any of a software or a product, then we are going to call that as a functional requirements. So in that we are going to have certain queries or certain standards will be there. Based on that, we are going to check whether it's a functional or non-functional requirement, so that the requirements which are related to the functional aspects of a software will going to be termed as functional requirements. So when I'm developing any of a software, at the time we have a certain requirement when it falls or when it related to the functional aspects. So for example, by including the models and by looking to the software, what do we wanted to take, and the number of analysts we require, and the number of programmers we require, all those related to what? Functional requirements. So that they define functions and functionality within and from the software system. So these functions as well as its functionality will going to be defined within and from the software system. Then what are the examples we can expect from this functional requirements? So search options, which is given to the user to search from various invoices. This is what one function. This is what one operation. So when a requirement is related to this search option, example I am taking. So with respect to this search example, I just wanted to require one search button. So there must be a predefined wordings. So all those requirements comes under what? Functionality. So that is also one of the example. And user must be able to mail any report to management. So you are mailing that operation whatever we are performing, that is also one of the functional requirements. And also user can be divided into groups, and groups can be given as a separate rights. So all the user needs to be differentiated to each other, and each user must have their own privilege as well as the rights. So all these kind of example which falls under this functional requirement. In order to have a smooth and efficient usage of any of a software, this functional requirement is also very, very important. Then what about non-functional requirements? If it is functional, then it will be related to functional activities or operation. When the requirements which is not related to functional aspect of a software, then we are going to call that as a non-functional requirement. And this non-functional requirement or will going to have certain characteristics. We'll see what are those characteristics. So in the non-functional requirement, it includes security concern. So confidentiality needs to be maintained and it has to have certain credential. With the help of that credential only, the software needs to be used. That is what? Security and logging. So here it has to keep all the records. So whatever could be the history and the future days, whatever the usage that we can expect from a particular software, everything needs to be logged in. That means it has to be stored, and also we require certain storage space in order to store all these activities. And also we have a configuration. It will be based on a type of configuration that we require for a particular software or a system, and also based on its performance, like how much time it is taking as a response time, what is the cost it require, so within which time or what is its potentiality to work with uncertain things. All those comes under performance, and also related to cost. We need to bother about cost also. Within a given amount, within a given budget, the software needs to be developed. And also interoperability. So when I say software, it can't be a single module. It may comprise of n number of modules, and the operability between one module to another module is also mandatory. So if you don't have an interoperability, then there is no functionality, or we can't do the integration test also. So when there is a coupling and when there is a interoperability between the modules or a requirements of a software, then it will be easy. Even that characteristics has to be there, and it has to be flexible in nature and disaster recovery. So if something goes wrong with the software, how fastly it can come back to the previous stage. That is what we are checking, its potentiality to work with a crash system, or what is its potentiality or capability to come over from the existing crash system. That is what disaster recovery. And also we have a accessibility. It should not say it's Monday, I can't give the access to you, it's evening, I can't give the access to you. It should not be like that. It has to be available all the time, and it needs to be accessible only for the authorized and authenticated users. So if it imposes all these kind of characteristics, then we can say that we have fulfilled all the non-functional requirements. I hope you all understood. So now we'll see another topic, that is regarding categories of logical requirements. So sometimes what we use, like it can be must have, should have, could have, and can be a wish list. So here we have a certain number of a software, certain number of a requirement is there. At the time, if we say logically, if we say that requirement must have, then what it can be, software cannot be said operational without them. When we are using a must have, so this functionality must have to be there in a software. So this is the must operation or a must module in a software. At the time, we can't leave that. That means the software which cannot be said operational without them. So we can't leave that. It has to be incorporated. Whatever the requirements which is coming under must have, then that has to be there when we are developing a software. And also should have. So that means should have in the sense what future we can use that. So as of now, I don't have that module or a software or a requirement, but in future I should have that. That means in a coming days, to improve or to enhance the quality and functionality of a software, it is mandatory to include that, so that enhancing the functionality of a software. Then what it could be, could have. So it can be there and it can't be there. But moreover, it will not going to affect whether we have that requirement or not in a system. But in future days, it has to be incorporated to expect more efficiency in a software, so that software can still properly function with these requirements. So though we don't have that requirements, then the software is also running in an efficient manner. That is what could have. If it is wish list, then these requirements do not map to any objectives of a software. Okay, Atakunto Lekakilla. In that way, it's a, that is what wish list. So by adding all these features or by removing all these features which comes under wish list, will not going to affect anything to the operation or objectives of a software. So by including all this, we can come to the conclusion that while developing any of a software, then must be implemented. Whatever the requirements or a software we have in the must have category, that needs to be implemented. And also we have a should have. It's a matter of debate with the stakeholders and negotiation. So here, whether we wanted to include it or not, that needs to be debated and needs to be communicated with the stakeholders. If they say okay, then that will reach to the must have category. And also, whereas we have a could have and wish list can be kept for software updates. As of now, we don't require this, but if we wanted to enhance or if you wanted to have a upgraded version of a software, at that time whatever we have in a could have and wish list, that needs to be incorporated logically to the software in order to uphold its efficiency and effectiveness. I hope you all understood my today's session. Let me meet you in the next session. In the content, we are going to have a user interface requirement and also we'll see about the software system analyst about. So it's all about my today's session. Let me meet you in the next session. Until that, keep learning, keep on growing. Thank you.